In the final years of King George III's reign, while the nation clung to fragile order, the Duke of Wessex stood as an emblem of discipline. Alexander Ravenswood, 24, admired for his composure, had built walls around his heart that no affection dared breach. Duty had been forced upon him early. Love, he was convinced, invited chaos. On this rain-heavy evening, his resolve would be tested by the one person who still reminded him of simpler days. Lady Georgiana Ashford, once the daughter of a respected nobleman, now bore the humble title of governess to the Duke's youngest sister. At 23, she carried herself with dignity that unsettled those who tried to belittle her reduced station. Candlelight captured the copper in her dark hair as she was ushered into the corridor outside the Duke's study. Her heartbeat thundered beneath the modest fabric of her gown. She sensed that this summons would not bring kindness. Alexander appeared in the doorway, harshly illuminated by the flicker behind him. "Lady Georgiana," he began, his voice polished into formality, as though they had never run barefoot through the Wessex orchards as children. "I require your departure from this household before dawn." Georgiana stared, the words striking harder than the November wind. "Before dawn, Your Grace?" She tried to hold steady. "Have I committed some offense?" "You have not," he answered, though his jaw tightened. "Changes must be made." A governess with, he hesitated, eyes softening before retreating behind resolve. "Your presence invites misconceptions." There was society's whisper that an unmarried duke should not keep a beautiful governess so close. She drew a breath, swallowing sharp stones. "I have served your sister well." "You have," he admitted quietly, the words escaping like a secret. "But I must ask that you pack your things and leave before dawn." His gaze refused to meet hers. "It is necessary." Necessary, the same word used for treaties and taxes. Her heart, however, was not a matter of necessity. It was breaking. She curtsied with grace despite sorrow. "If this is your order, I shall obey it." There was more she wished to say. He offered no chance. A footman escorted her to her chambers. Georgiana lit a candle with trembling fingers. Each object she gathered into her trunk carried a memory. The ribbon his sister had gifted her, letters from her deceased father, and at the bottom of a drawer, the pressed violet Alexander had once plucked during spring. She paused, the fragile bloom blurred by tears. He had forgotten. She never could. Servants whispered, "She is being dismissed." One murmured, "A governess must know her place." Another added, "His Grace will soon announce a more suitable bride." Their judgment coiled like smoke. The rain hardened, striking the window panes. Georgiana wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and stepped into the corridor. She would not grant them the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. Strength, her father once said, is quiet until tested. Downstairs, stable boys loaded her trunk onto a waiting carriage. A lantern glowed against wet cobblestones. She paused before stepping inside, taking a final look at the estate, the stone palace where she had learned to hope again. She wished she could hate him. It would be easier than remembering the boy who had sworn never to let her face hardship alone. Unseen above, Alexander stood behind a balcony window, watching with an expression no servant would describe. His gloved hands were fisted at his sides. When Georgiana glanced toward the mansion, his breath caught, expecting she might look at him. She did not. She lowered her head and entered the carriage, the door shutting with a decisive thud that echoed through him. The horses lurched forward. Alexander's eyes followed until the lantern disappeared into the storm. Only then did he allow the ache to surface. He pressed a hand to the window pane, breath fogging the glass. He told himself that removing her was protection, from gossip, from scandal. Yet the hollow inside mocked such logic. In the courtyard, a small item lay half hidden in the mud, parchment sealed with her family crest. The letter she had hoped to give him. A confession, perhaps. A plea. Or something far more dangerous. Truth. The wind lifted it slightly, urging someone to notice, but no eyes searched the darkness. The storm's rumble seemed to echo her own unspoken protest, urging her to turn back, to demand an explanation beyond cold duty. She lifted her chin instead, refusing tears. Alexander remained frozen at the window, fighting the impulse to rush after her, to say the one truth he feared, that letting her go might destroy what remained of his heart. As the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, Georgiana's future plunged into uncertainty, while the Duke's carefully constructed order quietly began to fracture. The carriage rattled through the soaked countryside until the silhouettes of Wessex faded into the distance behind Georgiana. She held herself upright despite the cold infiltrating her bones. Pride was her final shield, and she clutched it tightly. The only companion to her thoughts was the rhythmic clatter of wheels, yet her mind insisted on replaying Alexander's impassive gaze. She promised herself she would not crumble over a man who deemed her unworthy of his world. The arrival at Lady Harrington's residence just after sunrise offered a fragile reprieve. The widow, a longtime friend of Georgiana's late father, welcomed her with a warmth that transcended propriety. Wrapping Georgiana in an embrace, she murmured, "You look exhausted, child. Come inside before the wind claims you entirely." The kindness nearly undid Georgiana's composure, but she forced her voice to remain steady, explaining only that circumstances had changed and she must seek new employment. Lady Harrington studied her with eyes sharpened by years of political insight. She did not press further, yet. Over breakfast, Georgiana noticed an attorney's leather satchel placed near the sideboard. Papers protruded from its mouth, one stamped with a familiar crest. Her pulse startled. "That seal," she whispered, rising before she realized it. Lady Harrington followed her gaze and sighed, as though deciding something weighty. "These arrived for you long ago," the widow explained. "News of your father's final mission was delayed by bureaucratic foolishness. I vowed to deliver the truth when you were strong enough to receive it." She gestured for Georgiana to sit beside the satchel. "Your father died preserving the crown's interest, not losing it. He died a hero, not a conspirator." A breath left Georgiana that she had held for years. She remembered the shameful rumors, whispers that Lord Ashford had mishandled funds or betrayed confidences. They had cost her inheritance, reputation, and security. Hands trembling, she opened the documents. Names of powerful men were printed alongside her father's. The statements made plain that he had prevented treason, not committed it. She blinked back tears of fury and relief. Lady Harrington rested a reassuring hand over hers. "This gives you leverage, respect, influence, and perhaps even a return to the circles you once belonged to, if you choose to pursue it." Georgiana nodded, heart beating faster than hope had allowed in years. She now possessed proof that society had misjudged her family. The past no longer held her in chains. By evening, Lady Harrington began crafting invitations to a grand ball she had planned to host. "The elite will attend," she said, as if it were trivial. "Parliament members, dukes, perhaps even that particular Duke of Wessex." Georgiana's posture stiffened at the name. The widow immediately noticed. "Do not allow pride to blind you to opportunity. Tonight, you were cast aside. That does not mean you must remain overlooked." In Georgiana's small guest chamber, she considered the daunting prospect of returning to the very world that had scorned her. Could she face those judging eyes? Could she face him? She lifted the pressed violet from her trunk, now brittle but still precious. After a moment's hesitation, she pinned it near her heart. The symbolism was hers alone, a reminder that love once existed but would not dictate her worth. The ball arrived swiftly. Carriages lined Lady Harrington's illuminated estate. Attendants hurried between the doors, ushering in dignitaries adorned with jewels, silks, and expectations. Georgiana descended the staircase with poise she once believed lost. The soft green gown chosen for her complemented her grace without appearing ostentatious. Conversations faltered as she entered the grand hall. Recognition flickered in startled eyes. "Is that not the dismissed governess?" A gentleman whispered into his companion's ear. What brazen audacity! Yet others eyed her differently, measuring, reassessing. When the Duke of Wessex arrived, escorted by obligation and pride, his footsteps halted upon seeing her. Alexander had prepared himself for endless polite conversation, not for the ghost of his heart standing radiant beneath crystal chandeliers. His control slipped for a moment, his breath caught. Georgiana pretended not to notice. She turned gracefully as another suitor stepped forward. Lord Colborne, an ambitious young politician, requested her hand for the upcoming dance. "Lady Georgiana," he said with a respectful bow. "May I have the pleasure?" Before she could answer, Alexander approached, his tone too calm to be natural. "That will not be necessary," he declared, the line delivered like an order rather than a request. Georgiana lifted her chin. His lordship asked kindly. "I have no cause to refuse him." Her defiance was quiet but unmistakable. Alexander's jaw tightened. Lord Colborne, sensing the tension, offered her his arm with satisfaction. The dance began, every turn and step watched by eager eyes. Alexander stood isolated, anger churning beneath the surface. His own sister, the young Lady Eleanor, tugged at his sleeve. "You miss her," she whispered, her innocence cutting straight through his armor. He murmured a weak denial that convinced neither of them. When the dance concluded, Georgiana moved toward the center platform where Lady Harrington addressed the assembled guests. With controlled composure, Georgiana presented the documents validating her father's heroism. Gasps rippled. Nobles who had once dismissed her now murmured apologies disguised as admiration. Parliament men exchanged calculating looks, their opinions shifting in real time. Alexander watched her reclaim her dignity with courage that humbled him. Every word she spoke deepened his realization of how gravely he had erred. She was not a liability. She was extraordinary. As applause broke out, Georgiana stepped away from the spotlight and headed toward the terrace for air. She had won the room's respect, but the sensation felt strangely hollow. For all her resolve, her heart still reacted when Alexander moved. And now he was crossing the marble floor straight toward her, determination in every stride. The night was far from its end. Candlelight spilled from the ballroom onto the terrace, where the cool night air greeted Georgiana like a long-awaited confidant. She leaned against the stone balustrade, closing her eyes as applause continued behind her. Tonight she had reclaimed her name, yet triumph brought no ease to the tension knotted beneath her ribs. Victory meant little when one heart refused to forget what it had lost. The sound of measured footsteps approached, familiar enough to send a tremor through her chest. She did not turn. "Lady Georgiana," Alexander said. Low and taut with emotion he was determined to hide. "A word, if you please." She opened her eyes, letting the moonlight sharpen her composure. "I am surprised you dare request anything of me now, Your Grace," she replied. Her voice held the steady edge of someone who had learned to bleed without showing it. "You dismissed me with great efficiency." His gaze flickered with guilt before he regained his rigid posture. "I have my reasons." "Indeed." She folded her hands, keeping them from shaking. The reputation of a governess is always the first sacrifice upon the altar of propriety. Alexander took a step closer. "It was not your reputation I sought to protect." The admission slipped out with surprising force. His eyes told the truth. Fear had guided him more than expectation. Georgiana held his stare. "Then whose?" The question hovered between them, dangerous and unrelenting. He exhaled slowly, as if the confession cost him air. "Mine." Her heart clenched. "You believe affection diminishes you." "Affection," he corrected, "destroys men like me. It creates vulnerability. A duke must be immutable, controlled." His voice hardly rose, yet the frailty beneath shook her more than any outburst might. She stepped away, unable to bear both the longing and the logic. "What you call control, others might name cowardice." He flinched, only slightly but enough. "I watched you tonight," he said. "Every soul in that room did. Your poise silenced their scorn. You commanded them." His eyes softened, thick with awe he could not suppress. "You were magnificent." Her breath caught. Praise from him still mattered, no matter how fiercely she resisted its power. She gripped the balustrade until her knuckles whitened. Admiration does not excuse cruelty. The candles inside flickered with the music of a new waltz. Couples swirled past the terrace, glimpsed through draping curtains like figures in a dream. Alexander's hand hovered near hers, not touching, merely seeking permission to try. "I wronged you," he said simply. "If I had believed I could keep you here without causing harm, I would never have sent you away." Georgiana turned her face toward the gardens, hiding the vulnerability in her eyes. "You wield authority as though feelings obey it. You decide who remains, who vanishes. You refuse to see the wreckage behind your edicts." He dared step to her side. "What would you have me do? Express devotion before those who would weaponize it? Allow Parliament to think me swayed by sentiment rather than reason? My every action is scrutinized, and mine is inconsequential," she whispered. "Not to me." The words emerged raw, unpolished. He reached out, fingertips grazing the violet pin to her bodice. "I remember this." Her pulse thundered. "Then you remember everything," she said, unable to stop the truth from trembling through her voice. Music swelled again, a new melody, slower, heavier with emotion. Alexander offered his hand. "Dance with me," he pleaded quietly. "Just once more." She stared at his gloved palm. Acceptance meant reopening wounds. Refusal meant denying the yearning that had never left her. With reserved caution, she placed her hand in his. Heat erupted from the contact. An old promise reignited. They stepped into the light of the ballroom. Gasps rippled like wind over water. Couples drifted aside, offering the floor to the pair whose history now burned before them. Each slow turn brought Alexander nearer, their breaths forming shared clouds in the candle-warmed air. "You must not look at me like that," Georgiana murmured. "Others will notice." "I care not," he replied, voice hushed yet resolute. "Let them see what they will. I have grown weary of pretending you're anything less than the axis on which my world tilts." Her chest tightened at the confession. "And yet, you command me to vanish whenever fear chases courage." He swallowed hard. "I'm trying," he said, "but I fear I am learning too late how to live." Their steps slowed to near stillness. Only inches separated their lips. For a heartbeat, everything else vanished. Expectation, judgment, reason. A sharp cough intruded. The music faltered briefly as Alexander's expected bride, a wealthy heiress with watchful eyes, observed them with barely masked outrage. The moment shattered. Georgiana withdrew her hand, restored her mask of grace. "Your decisions are not made in this room, Alexander. They are made in Parliament chambers and drawing rooms where affection holds no seat." He tried to speak, but she continued first. "Tonight, I reclaimed what was taken from me. I will not surrender it again, not even to you." Before he could stop her, she curtsied and turned away. He watched her disappear into the crowd, fighting the instinct to follow. His heart demanded pursuit. His title demanded restraint. That internal battle clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. A messenger hurried toward him moments later, delivering a letter bearing the seal of Parliament. Alexander read the contents, face paling beneath noble composure. In the morning, he was to announce his engagement to the heiress. No further delays tolerated. The orchestra resumed without missing a beat, but Alexander stood frozen in place. The walls he had relied upon were shifting beneath him. Georgiana's courage now haunted every breath he drew. He knew his next choice would determine whether he remained a prisoner of duty or dared reach for the woman whose absence had already ruined his sleep. Far across the ballroom, Georgiana paused near the terrace doors. For one fleeting instant, their eyes met through the gilded blur of dancers. Neither moved, neither spoke. Yet both understood. Tomorrow would demand a decision neither was prepared to face. Dawn crept reluctantly into the sky, as though even the sun feared what daylight might expose. The grand hall of Lady Harrington's estate prepared for a morning assembly of peers, an affair designed to please Parliament and parade alliances. Alexander stood in a side chamber, shoulders tense beneath the weight of his ceremonial coat. Servants adjusted gilded clasps and embroidered cuffs, but their touches felt like shackles. The letter he received last night, lay folded in his pocket, heavy as iron. Today he was expected to declare his engagement to a woman he did not love. Duty had never seemed so suffocating. Meanwhile, Georgiana sat alone in a withdrawing room, hands clasped tightly around the armrest. She knew of the morning's agenda. Rumor already spread through the corridors like wildfire. The Duke of Wessex will be taken off the marriage market within the hour. The thought pierced her resolve despite all she had fought to regain. She reminded herself that she had not restored her father's honor to secure a man's affection. Yet her heart protested logic, whispering that love must matter somewhere, somehow. Lady Harrington entered quietly, watching Georgiana's attempt to hide her trembling. "Your courage last night shook this house," she said with pride. "Do not allow fear to undo it." "I am not afraid," Georgiana insisted, though the quiver in her voice betrayed her. "I only wish—" She stopped. Wishes were luxuries she could not afford. "Walk into that hall with your head as high as any duchess," the widow advised. "Let them see the woman your father raised you to be." She placed a gentle kiss on Georgiana's brow before leaving. Georgiana inhaled deeply and stood. Whatever occurred today, she would witness it without flinching. Her gown was simpler than many glittering morning dresses around her, yet she moved with an elegance untouched by jewels or title. The assembly gathered beneath towering windows, sunlight catching dust in the air like suspended stars. Parliament representatives mingled beside aristocrats who pretended not to eavesdrop. The Duke's expected fiancée, Lady Clarendon, stood radiant in opulent lace, confidence painted into every feature. She looked upon Georgiana with triumph barely concealed. A victor before the contest had even begun. Alexander entered, posture rigid, expression carved from stone. When his gaze found Georgiana across the room, something inside him faltered. A flicker of vulnerability, real and unguarded, broke through his facade. It was enough to tilt every moment that followed. The Prime Minister cleared his throat. "If His Grace is prepared," he announced grandly, "we shall proceed with the declaration." Silence fell. Alexander stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was measured but carried an undercurrent of upheaval. "I appreciate the Crown's concern for my future," he began. "However, a marriage devoid of sincerity serves no one, not Parliament, not Wessex, and certainly not myself." A ripple of confusion swept through the assembly. Lady Clarendon stiffened, her lips tightening. Alexander continued, louder now. "I have been a prisoner of expectation, but a man who governs others must first govern his own heart." He paused, eyes locked on Georgiana alone. "I wrongfully dismissed someone precious to me, out of fear rather than wisdom." Whispers flared. Several nobles stared at Georgiana with dawning understanding. Alexander dropped to one knee. The entire hall gasped. Nobility did not kneel lightly, especially not for love. "Lady Georgiana Ashford," he said, voice resonant with conviction, "I once told you to leave before dawn, believing I protected us both. But the night stole my peace, and daylight revealed a truth I can no longer ignore." His hand extended toward her, steady despite the scandal he invited. "My heart has belonged to you since childhood. If you can forgive my folly, will you allow me the honor of devoting every dawn to your happiness?" Georgiana stood motionless, breath trapped somewhere between disbelief and joy. The room watched, waiting to devour any hesitation. Yet she saw only Alexander, unguarded, willing to risk reputation for the sake of truth. She stepped forward, each motion deliberate. "You cast me into darkness," she murmured, the memory still tender. "But you followed me there." Her fingers brushed his, warmth blooming between them. "I accept, not as a governess seeking status, but as the woman who has always loved you." Relief collapsed his shoulders. He stood, clasping her hand fully, reverently. Applause erupted, some genuine, others resigned to inevitability. Lady Clarendon left in a rustle of offended silk, but no one chased her. Parliament members exchanged hurried whispers. The Crown would adjust. Love had just rewritten the terms. Alexander leaned close enough that only she could hear. Thank you, he whispered, voice breaking, for coming back, for standing tall, for being braver than I. You gave me reason to be, she replied. The ceremony followed quickly, as though fate refused any further delay. Vows were spoken with steady reverence, sealing the union long written in their histories. When Alexander kissed her, the world seemed to hush, anger, doubt, and fear melting into a single breathtaking certainty. Later, as they stood beneath the brightening sky, he laced his fingers through hers. I once believed love to be weakness, he confessed softly. Now I see it is the only strength that endures. Georgiana rested her head against his shoulder. Then let us be strong together. The sun climbed higher, gilding Wessex in brilliant light. Dawn had come, not as a threat, but a promise reborn.